Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2023 week 17. That's April 24th to April 30th. And in this video we are, surprise still on wiring. So what I got there are some electrical contactors or battery disconnects. So the way it works is when you supply the switch with power and ground, what it's going to do is connect the two big terminals on top, and the reason why I got two is I need one to disconnect the alternator and one to disconnect battery to the fuse box. You technically could get away with only using one, but then you would have the battery lead going up to your alternator and live all the time. So, you know, what happens if you're at the racetrack, you get into a front end collision, something bad happens, like, you know, you're at the big end and, you know, you're doing good clip and, you know, hit the wall and smash it, and then all of a sudden, you know, your whole front end's caved in, your alternator's now pushed back, and, you know, all of a sudden that battery is the battery lead is still going to your alternator. Well, you know, now it starts sparking out on the frame or on the engine or on any of the pulleys, and got some fuel leaking in there. You know, it's just a bad situation. So I figured, do this properly, get two. One of those will disconnect the alternator from the battery, and then the other one disconnects the battery from the fuse box. Well, to start getting this all figured out, we need to pull the lid off the battery box, and we'll set the battery in it, and obviously that's where all of the battery connections are going to end up going. So we need to have the battery in there just to get everything all sorted out and figured out into place. And before we get to doing any of the connections, I want to get this all bundled up, and, you know, once it's all bundled up, we can figure out where we're going to put the battery disconnects and, you know, run our wires from there. So this part, I'm just sitting here thinking and trying to figure out where I'm going to put these battery disconnects, and, you know, which way I want to orient them. I know that I'm going to have power and ground wires coming up to it, as well as the main, you know, power wires coming off the battery and going to the front of the car. So I've got this oriented like this, kind of side by side, with the trigger wires facing the bundle. That way I don't have a bunch of wires coming out of the bundle and like looping around or anything like that. It's just going to kind of blend seamlessly into the bundle, and then I'll have my two main power wires just as you see it there. So I'll have the power wire going to the fuse box, going to one of the disconnects, the wire going to the front rad lock going to the other, and then, as you can see, these wires are super duper long, so when I cut them, I'll use the remainder of the wire to go up to the battery. So I'm just using these self-tappers just to hold it in for now. I need, at some point in time, I'm going to need to pull everything out of the car so I can paint it and do body work and stuff like that. So when I pull everything out of the car, I will replace the self-tapping screws with you know, some nutserts and bolts, something a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer. But until then, these self-tappers will work just fine. It's kind of the same as using those rubber clamps to hold the main bundles coming down the side of the car. I will be replacing that with something else, but for right now, it's a great way to just hold it so I can get everything kind of sorted and placed. Now that those are mounted, I am ready to make a couple of connections. Alright, so the first two main connections are done. Now I'm going to move on to the connections that go up into the battery box. Alright, so now that I have those main connections done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to organize this wire bundle a little bit more, because what I need is I need the fuel pump and the fuel gauge sender wires to go down into below the car. And you saw in a previous video where I drilled that hole out and I put my ground wire. So those 3 wires are going to go down there. And then for the fuel pump, so that's fuel pump power, fuel gauge signal, and fuel gauge ground that I'm sending down there. And I'll pick up the fuel pump ground from below. That's very easy to do. But with those 3 wires that need to go down out of the bundle, I can start zip tying the rest of the wires back towards the battery box. So right now I have the ground post closest to the camera and the positive towards the rear of the car. And when I start pulling these wires up into there, I realize it's a little bit tight. I don't like it so much, so I actually end up flipping the battery around just to make it a little bit nicer and a little bit easier to work on. So this is the battery hold down that came with the car, and I haven't had it on at this point in time, so I'm just kind of loosely putting it in the car. And this battery isn't really wide enough to work with the hold down and all of the pieces that it came with. So I know I am going to replace this battery for probably like an Optima, I think it is, a deep cycle battery. But just for mock-up and getting these things into place, the battery posts may move a little bit, and I account for that in all of my wiring. So I'll be able to move the battery cables back or forth a little bit, because I do leave enough extra wire for that. Alright, one thing that I also have to factor in is I need a fuse. So I'm putting a 250 amp main fuse in this. So that's what I'm kind of getting organized there. And I'm going to mount that right onto the battery box. So it's just nice and easily accessible. And, you know, if I'm ever driving and the car dies, I can just pop the cover off and see it right there. Yeah, it's actually kind of weird thinking back on it. When I started on this project, I just went with it. I didn't stop to think. I just kind of, I need this somewhere. I made a rough plan. I ran with it, which is very far departure from the things that I usually do, which is sit there and hum and haw and look at it for, you know, an hour or two before realizing that I should have just started an hour ago. So it was actually quite nice that I just went full throttle on this and got it done in a very quick amount of time, and very well done too. So I'm just marking off roughly where I want that, and before I actually drill, I don't want to drill into the battery, but I kind of want to make sure this is centered before I start drilling. And funny enough, just by eye, I pretty much had a dead center. So I kind of lucked out there. Maybe subconsciously I just put it centered because I know that's what I would have wanted. And so with that done, I can now run the wire up to the battery post, and yeah. So this kind of gives you an idea. You can see the cable comes up and then kind of loops around to the left, makes a big loop around. So that's why I know that when I get a new battery, I'll be able to move these terminals around a bit without too much stress. Alright, so with the battery box back in the car, I'm starting to get some of the ground wires going. And as you can see, I'm doing my best to do the same thing I did on the positive side, which is kind of bring the cable in, loop it around. But there was one wire that I couldn't loop. I forget which one that was. That may be the one going up to the front of the car, and maybe the one going under the car. I don't quite remember, but there's enough length that I can get it on the actual terminal. So as much as it's not going to loop around the same as the others, for right now, I'm just going to leave it. I'm not going to mess with it too much. Alright, so a bit of a interlude. So I got a brand new starter from Western Motorsports. So this is a high torque mini starter. It's, nothing overly special. But I did ask them to send me a sticker for the cabinet wall, and they sent me this awesome Western Motorsports decal. Unfortunately, it is black, so it does blend in with my cabinets pretty much perfectly. If you're looking for it, you can see it, but it is pretty stealth up there. And yeah, so now that I've got a starter, it's sitting on the bench, and as I've said before, the best way to get something off of your bench is to put it on the damn car. So many times I've had stuff on the bench, and if I just put it on the car, it goes away. So I'm just finding the bolts for this. If I recall correctly, they're 1/2 inch, I think. No, 3/8. They're 3/8, I think. Yeah, definitely not 1/2 inch. That's way too much. I believe they're 3/8 bolts. And so I'm just going to throw it in here. Yeah, I'm not like torquing this down or anything or cranking on it super hard. I'm just loosely putting it in there just to, keep it in place for now. One of the reasons why I wanted the starter is because the power wire coming out of the rad lock at the front goes to the starter, and then the alternator wire also is going to end up at the starter. So it's kind of a critical piece to do the wiring at the front end of the car. And we are doing a little bit of cleanup. Let's take a little break to C47. Yeah, that's my guy. Alright, with that little break over, let's get back to wiring up the battery and the battery disconnects. Since I have a whole pile of stuff in the hatch of the car, I'm just kind of moving it because I want to be able to get the camera in a nice angle for you guys, so gotta make some space for it. So this wire right here that I'm running down, this wire is going to go to one side of the bumper battery disconnect switch. So I'm going to have two disconnect switches. I'm going to have an emergency stop switch above my head on the switch panel, or if I end up on my roof, still above my head but on the ground, switch panel. And this one is going to run to the back bumper. Now, I'm very intentionally putting one side of this on one end of the 250 amp fuse. If that fuse blows, it's going to shut the car off. Or if for some reason that wire going to the switch grounds out, it'll blow the fuse and also switch turn power off to the car. I think it's the best way to do that, because if there's that big of a short, it means that there's probably going to be a fire. So I want the ability to turn all the power to the car off. And you know, what happens if I get rear-ended or something like that? My fuel pump's right at the back of the car. If I get rear-ended and that switch shorts out on the bumper, I want it to blow that fuse. I don't want the wire getting hot or sparking with, my fuel pump right there, possibly broken fuel lines. That would just not be a great thing. So doing my best to kind of protect myself from the car going up in flames. So that thicker red wire that's kind of going past the fuse and then into the fuse box, that is the power wire for the Holley Dominator, and that wire is has to go direct to the battery. That's what Holley says. That power wire goes direct to the battery. No splices, no posts, nothing, just direct to the battery. So that's what we are doing there. So what I'm doing right here is I'm just checking all the different wires just to label them. When I go to finalize the harness, I'll have heat shrink labels on everything, so all the wires are labeled. And so yeah, that's what I'm doing right here, just checking to see which ones are which. And there we have the positive side all done up. I'm so happy with the way that's turned out. I'm not sure how I'm going to finalize the wires coming through the box. I'll probably need a grommet of some sort, but so far that is just looking amazing. went super quick, super easy. It does bother me that that one ground cable doesn't bend and flow with the rest of them, but it wasn't enough for me to do anything about it right now. I very well may redo that at some point. But until that point, let's do some cleanup. All the battery cables are done. ECU is connected. My bumper disconnect switch is technically wired. I still need to run the wires to the back bumper, but that's a whole other story. Yeah, since that job's done, let's do some cleanup. Alright, now that we've done our cleanup, we are going to start disassembling the front end of the car. Now we're going to pull all the stuff out, and the reason for that is I need to pull this engine out. If you guys remember in a video way back when, I lit a plastic bag on top of the engine when I didn't have the intake on it, and that caused plastic bag to melt all through the top end of this engine. So I need to pull it out, pull it all apart, and remove any of the plastic from any of the places it shouldn't be. And since I haven't had this engine run in a long time, but I've kind of spun it over, just give it a once over, make sure it's not going to blow up on day one. Now mind you, I will be throwing boost at it, so that might happen anyways, but I want to at least go through it, make sure there's nothing obviously wrong with it. If I were smart, I'd do a compression test while I have it out, but I'm not that smart. I'm probably just going to run it anyways, because quite frankly, even if the compression was bad, I'm not really interested in going and spending money on a different engine. I just need it to run, and then if it does blow up, well, once I eventually get to that point, I'm building a new engine for this car anyways, so that's why I'm not too bothered about if there's anything really wrong with this one, other than I don't want it to just instantly blow up because I left a bunch of plastic in it. So yeah, we're just going to go ahead and we're just going to take apart all of the things that we put into this. So undo the fuel connections, undo the heater core, pull the alternator off, pull the AC off, pull the Pro Charger off, pull the power steering off, pull the intake off, and at that point in time, we'll be ready to pull the engine out. Okay, and that is the last of the accessories that I'm going to pull off. So I'm just going to grab my engine leveler. I need to hook that up to the front and back of the heads. But before I do that, I'm going to try and shorten those chains up a little bit. They are pretty long. I have made it work with it as in the. I have made it work with the length that it is, but it'd be nicer if it was a little bit shorter. So looking at this, I wasn't able to get it any shorter because the shackle will only go through the chains at the end. So I'd have to cut it down, and I just didn't want to do that. So I'll leave it as is. So now I'm just finding some bolts to go into the front of the heads and the back of the heads. So it will be easier to pull the engine without the driver's side header on, so I'm just quickly pulling that off. Alright, and with all that, it is time to get this engine pulled out of here because I want to start working on some stuff on the firewall, and I also need to strip the engine down and re-gasket it. So the only way I'm going to be able to do that is with it out of the car. So that means getting the engine hoist set up. Well, before I can pull the engine out of the car, I of course need to disconnect the transmission. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pull the bolts from the transmission to the scatter shield. The other option is to disconnect the scatter shield from the engine. But for pulling this, I can just pull it right off the engine. I don't need to pull it from the transmission. I don't need to separate it from the engine. I can pull the engine out with the scatter shield. Before I do that, though, I do need to hold this transmission up, and the way I'm going to do that is with two ratchet straps. So I'm going to go from the driver's side frame rail to the cross member on the passenger side and vice versa. So two ratchet straps will easily hold that transmission up. So just looking through that, it looks like I didn't actually unbolt the transmission yet. So I'm not quite sure what my thought process is here, but I guess we're going to try and get this lifted, I suppose. There we go. Now that I've got the lift in place, now I'm going to go and unbolt the, I think there's 6 bolts bolting the tranny to the scatter shield. Alright, with everything unbolted, now we can try and lift this out of there. So, as you can see, I'm lifting it up, but as I lift, it's actually just like almost instantly losing tension. You can see those chains drooping as it's just sitting there, locked, not doing anything. And if you remember before from when I was swapping water pump bolts out, it just does not hold pressure. Off camera, I tried a whole bunch to get it to hold pressure, and that just would not work. So that's actually where we are going to leave it off for this week. And as always, if you've stuck around this long, I would like to thank you for viewing, and we'll catch you in the next one.